Welcome to another episode of Making Sense of Family Business. I'm Jon Kenfield, the Family Business Solutionist. Today I'm talking about silence and secrecy, which are yet another of the common causes of conflict in family business. I'm going to explain what they are, what they do, and what you can do about them. So let's get into it. Family businesses hardly ever fail as a result of too much communication. They do fail when there is too little communication or poorly executed communication or badly directed communication. But here's the rub. Although a lot of people will say our problems began, our relationships broke down because we stopped communicating or communications failed, that is blaming the wrong thing. Communication is like a gun. It doesn't care what it's doing. It simply follows the instructions of the shooter. So it's the shooter who decides where they are going to shoot and what they are going to shoot. Similarly, communication is an outcome. Communications can be effective, they can be ineffective. The point is, the relationship that underlies whatever communication is taking place between two or more people will have a major impact on the effectiveness of that communication. So just think, for example, you're a parent, you're talking to a young child, the child is really distracted, you're really annoyed, you raise your voice, you're communicating, they're hearing. Is it effective? Not very often. Similarly, if you're in a stand-up battle with somebody, a nearest and dearest or whatever, because it does happen sometimes, when you are not managing yourselves properly, when your communication, when your relationship at that point in time is going through a toxic stage for whatever reason, it is very difficult unless you manage the communication skillfully to be heard properly and constructively so that you can resolve whatever problems are going on. That is the point about communication. It is a style of doing things that relies on a particular mindset and attitude. So we're going to talk about that. Suffice it to say at this point in time that if within a family there are poor communication skills and weak communication systems and no great talent for problem solving or good decision making or conflict management, the family is going to suffer as soon as it gets into any sort of strife to get its problems resolved and then move on in a good place. Usually what will happen is if the family doesn't have the systems or the skills, it will need some external help. And we'll talk about that later. Let's get back to our topics for today, silence and secrecy. Now, silence is obviously an absence of communication other than through body language. Silence is not necessarily malevolent, and it can be entirely passive. It may be the result of a lack of skill or a lack of confidence or a fear about the timing of a particular announcement or discussion or revelation. It may be that the speaker is driven by the hope that they can avoid hurt to other people. They may want to deny or avoid dealing with certain issues, which is a common problem in family business. Or they may simply lack the courage to have a courageous conversation with another person in the family. Secrecy is rather more malevolent or ominous than silence in that it involves a choice. It involves withholding information that other people may need as a conscious decision. Now, people use secrecy to avoid others understanding and knowing about certain facts, understanding your positions, your opinions, your feelings, a whole host of different things, and it can be used strategically to damage other people. The main thing is that when evidence of secrecy comes out, it is almost invariably accompanied with a mistrust of the person who's being secretive, and mistrust leads to low trust, and when you have a low trust environment, communications will struggle to be good. So let's just explore this a little bit further, and we're talking at the moment about the causes of conflict, and then we'll talk about strategies and solutions. I tend to think that there are two sides of the fence to communication, and let's say it's the sunny side and the dark and the stormy side. On the sunny side, we have open communication. It tends to be transparent, tactful, skillful, respectful. It's supported by positive mindsets, constructive attitudes, and respect for the other parties involved in the communication. When it's properly managed, this type of communication becomes a balanced communication when it is used as a tool for influencing in a way that will satisfy everybody's needs and interests. That's balanced because relationships are strengthened through every shared problem that is resolved. The other side of the fence is the dark and stormy side, and there lives silence and secrecy. The thing about silence and secrecy, notwithstanding their differences, is that they propel the family, or at least parts of it, into a state that we call technically the wobbles. And when people and family groups have wobbles, individuals will be insecure. Insecurity will lead to assumptions and suspicions and negative interpretations and ultimately to resentments. All of this means there is a vacuum, either damage or vacuum or both, in the relationship, and we know that neither nature nor humans like vacuums. Nature abhors a vacuum. Humans hate silence. They hate for there to be a gap in a relationship. If there is a relationship, it needs to be filled with something. It can't just sit on both sides of the chasm. That's a Mexican standoff. So what do you fill the relationship with? If you don't have facts, if you don't have good feelings, if you don't have high trust, you'll fill it with whatever comes to hand, and that rubble tends to look like distrust, suspicion, negative assumptions, resentment, ultimately conflict. And whilst it's fair to say that full transparency is simply a pipe dream, we're talking about commercial operations, we're talking about sensitive families that like their privacy and so on. We're never going to have full transparency about everything, but balanced communication is good. Balanced communication means people get what they want, what they need, when they need it, the way they need it, and then there's no space for them to fill their heads and the relationship dynamic with all that sharp, spiky, negative rubble. I talk about balanced communication in much more detail in another video, but in simple terms, there are 5 core elements to balanced communication. The first, and possibly second, third, fourth and fifth, but the first is definitely clarity. If you're going to have balanced communication, the communicator and the communicatee need to be really clear about what is being said, why it's being said, how it's being said, and so on. Provided they're on the same page and they understand and their wavelengths are compatible, then they've got a sensible conversation or potentially sensible conversation taking place. If they have no clarity, they can be passing like ships in the night. And it's not unusual, I certainly used to find that in the early days of mediation, where you talk to one person, you say, well, that's pretty straightforward. You talk to the next person and you wonder whether you're even dealing with the same problem, because the perspectives are so different, the problems are characterized in totally different ways. So the starting point is always clarity, and at the beginning of any conversation of any importance, I would always recommend saying, let's clarify and agree what we're here to talk about and what we're trying to achieve. Even if we don't know what the final outcome is going to look like, let's at least make sure we're talking about the same thing so we don't end up going off at tangents and going backwards rather than forwards. Number two, the element number two is commitment. In balanced communication, you can't have passengers. Everybody is involved in that process, and silence doesn't mean and doesn't allow disagreement. The absence of disagreement implies agreement and actually means agreement within the ground rules of balanced communication. So everyone is committed to participate and participate with honesty to the best of their ability. The third element will be relevance. Whatever you're talking about needs to be relevant to all the people at the point in time. Otherwise, again, the minds will wander and people will not be on the same page and the outcomes are going to be suboptimal, to say the least. Fourth, we have timing. A good idea at the right time is much more valuable than a great idea at the wrong time. Just try having a serious conversation about buying a new home with somebody who's rushing out the door to go to work, or even more so, get the kids to school in time. It just doesn't work. You need to create the space, you need to create the environment. Timing is a big part of that. The fifth element is safety. And safety is physical and psychological. And that means that everybody needs to be confident that they can engage in the conversation without fear of retribution. And that retribution can be physical, or it can be, you can have your pay cut, you can have somebody getting violent with you, or it could be psychological in that they're disparaging, they're dismissive of whatever opinions you wanted to express. They don't take you seriously, you feel bad about it, and wish you weren't there in the first place. You can't have balanced communication if people allow that sort of environment be established and maintained throughout the communication. If you get it right, you won't get all the facts right, you won't get everybody 100% agree with anything, but what you will do is create in everybody's mind a sense of clarity and predictability. This is why we're here, this is what we're doing, this is where we're going, this is my role, I'm okay with that, I've raised my objections, they've been dealt with, I'm okay with that, I can move on. If not, after you check in that it's okay to move on, loop back, pick up the place where your views are diverging and working through it again until you are comfortable about moving on. The ultimate goal is to have a high level of trust and belief and confidence in the go-forward position. Coming back again to some of our definitions, let's remember that conflict in a family business context is a clash between two or more people of opinions and views and things like that. And in many, many family businesses, what distinguishes them from other types of conflict is that they're often an accumulation of little things that may go back for decades. And taken by themselves, each of those little things wasn't such a big deal, but they've eventually built into an absolute insurmountable mountain of obstruction or a volcano of objection, which nobody can get over and around. The short answer to dealing with that is don't try to ride in and prick the bubble and fix the problem. Deconstruct the situation, the facts, even the feelings that have been allowed to develop, and then spread them all out and look at them piece by piece by piece. Frequently we find people saying, so we've actually forgotten what this was all about. Now we're looking at it, there is nothing of any great significance there. We can just gather up the pieces, leave the dirt and the nasty bits out, and put it all back together again, and we'll be fine. And there is no sense of, we found a problem, we fixed a problem, we're now moving on with a commitment. We've actually evaporated the problem. Nice way to go if you can do it. So, in this context, silence is not usually malicious, it's more usually a result of lack of skill or confidence. Secrecy, on the other hand, is an active choice, and we need to draw people out And in both cases, with silence and secrecy, we need to allow them to push the silence and the secrecy aside and come forward with what they should have been talking about and disclosing in the first place, whilst maintaining face in that process. It is not just Oriental cultures that have a big emphasis on saving face. If you are going to humiliate somebody in the process of trying to get them to an agreement, you will struggle to get them to that agreement. And if you don't struggle to get them to the agreement, you'll certainly struggle to get them to fulfill the agreement afterwards, particularly if it's with family members. The problems we have, though, with silence and secrecy is that they will have generated known unknowns and unknown unknowns, to quote. This means they create uncertainties. The lack of information means other people are pushing into the dark, and then that gets filled with suspicions. And I found over 40 years or so of working with hundreds and hundreds of people in dispute environments, that is as often as not the constructed problem and the constructed resentment. It's as often and more often that has brought the parties to the table where they need to take out the big sticks than the original problem. If the original problem had been nipped in the bud early, it could have been fixed. From the perspective of where we are now, it can be fixed, but we've got to take away the blinkers first of all. The problem with all the unknowns that I was talking about previously is that it throws people into a position of being out of control. They can't plan. They don't know where they are now. They don't know where they're going. They're like a headless chook, and they don't like it. Most people do not like that. They like certainty, they fear change, they want to know where things are going so they can prepare for it, and so silence and secrecy denies them the ability to be in that place. Other family members will resent the fact that that's been done to them in the first place. At that point, self-interest overcomes collective interests. Individual family units start to compete with the broader family or with other family units within the broader family. And then we have a conflict in the family. So enough doom and gloom. What about some strategies and solutions? Well, the first thing to say is if you want to avoid having a family that is infected by silence and secrecy, rather than one that is empowered and energized by open communication, you need to start as early as possible to build a business family culture of open transparency. And you can do that with small children onwards, and you can maintain it by endlessly holding people accountable for those open, transparent communications. So that brings us into formal education. When kids are very little, you're not going to educate them too formally, but you can educate them very seriously into the concepts of collaboration and teamwork, as opposed to drag down competition, is more enjoyable and produces better results. If we can embed that idea when children are young, they are likely to take that into their growing up years. Eventually they will turn that into being able to work with their siblings, with their cousins, and with other people in general. They're not going to find themselves on the treadmill for the rest of their lives of always having to compete with everybody else to prove a point, as well as to be successful. So we should teach them balanced communication, problem solving, decision making, empathy, emotional intelligence, negotiation, even mediation skills. None of these are really that difficult, provided you build out the foundation in the first place, and you make better people by giving them that education as they're growing up. Now, because we're in a family business, and the business family sits behind the family business, we are not just a social entity. We have certain additional responsibilities and requirements and formalities that we need to be aware of and to observe and to deal with appropriately if we want to try and become a multi-generational family that can keep itself going. So this is what we call family business best practice. Best practice in family business are basically the same as best practices in any other business or organisational place. It's a whole series of things, from strategic plans at one end to the actual day-to-day skills required at the other end, via structures and systems on the way through, that have been proven by experience and study and research and so forth to produce consistently optimal results for families in business. So we start with the idea of having a strategic plan so everyone knows where things are going to go. We then put structures in place whose job it is to ensure that the plans which the structures have helped to develop are actually implemented and followed through. Otherwise it's all hot air. So at the beginning we will have a family council, like a board of directors for the family business. It makes the key decisions, it carries the authority, it sets the policies and procedures for the future, and it represents the needs of all relevant family members, like a board of directors. Below that, depending on the size of the family and the quality of its needs, they may have a family office, and that can be one person working part-time, often perhaps a family member who's raising children or something of that sort, and they provide services to the family, or they coordinate services to the family. So the whole family gets the benefit of having a family business, whether or not individual members are actually working in the business. Lots of different formats for family office. I just see it as a very useful operational arm for the family council. Then we have the family forum, and this is a communication forum for all family members, including quite young ones, to learn about the family, to learn about its work ethic, its history, its narrative, its story, its expectations, to talk about aspirations, expectations, concerns, problems, to demonstrate how the family can work together to be better as a collective than it could be if it was operating alone. This is powerful stuff, and it's one of the great benefits of a good family business. The governance structures are there to maintain, enforce, implement all of the plans, maintain consistency. They emphasise the fact that a business family is different to an ordinary social unit family because they need a high level of professionalism to interface smoothly with the family business, particularly if there's an expectation of continuing over multiple generations. Within the context of our communication topic for this particular video, silence, secrecy and so on, a family council and family governance can set itself the task of making sure that there is open and transparent information about everything that it is appropriate for individuals to know about at any given time. The governance structures, which is the way the whole place is operated, can make sure that balanced communication is utilised in all communications within the family, between the family and the business, and even into the business. And by the constant reinforcement and repetition, we teach family members how to do this stuff properly. It's also worth mentioning that the vast majority of work at the moment seems to be involved in succession planning and transition planning for family and business leadership and ownership. That should be linked in with the family's estate planning, so that if you have working, non-working family members, if there's a need to make sure that all of the next generation are dealt with as fairly as possible from the parents' estate, not just taking the cop-out, I love my children equally, therefore I'm going to spread my money equally and turn everything into cash and away it goes. It's an opportunity for the whole family to have conversations about how do we make things work to build on parents' legacy for the benefit of future generations. That's an adult conversation, and it happens within a family governance process. Governance systems are implemented and enforced and improved through disciplined culture. cultures of accountability, not cultures of blame. So although it may seem strange to use the word discipline in a family context, that's exactly what a family needs over many, many, many years and perhaps many generations if it wants to maintain harmonious sustainability. And a final point here is most of life is made up through problem solving and decision making. Important things, important moments in life, they all involve these things. So if as a family business and if as a business family you adopt a series of quality problem solving such as the concepts process that we talk about in other videos, it's a structured problem-solving decision-making process that enables entire teams, family groups and so on to collaborate inclusively to deal with problems and to arrive at solutions that address everybody's needs and interests. If you teach that from a very early age in a simplified form to even quite advanced years if people haven't already done it, you create that culture within the family of collaborative problem solving, collaborative teamwork, constructive thinking, positive mindsets, all of those things which will help the family to remain sustainable over many years. What do we do if, despite all of our best efforts, we still have a conflict in the family? And communications have become really, really strained, and we're very clear that we've got some serious issues need to be resolved, and we really don't have a plan for resolving them. How do we approach that? Well, the first thing is recognize you've got a problem. A problem. You may not have defined what the problem is, but you know you've got a problem. Once you've recognized you've got a problem and everyone has accepted some responsibility for being part of the problem and at least the team that's going to resolve it, we need to agree on what process ground rules we're going to follow. Now, these should already be specified in the family constitution and the policies. They should have been very clear from the way the kids have been educated through their whole lives that we are going to have responsible problem-solving processes that follow a process before we make a decision. And that needs to be consistent. We need to clarify everyone's engagement in the workout process, whatever that may be. And that's with a view to creating some hope in people's minds that we can come out the other side of this in one piece without necessarily flaying anyone in the process. Once we've set that context, we can start to get into the content, and the starting point is exactly what is the problem we're trying to fix. What situation do we need to improve? What is going wrong? And what do we want, what do we think we want to do about it? Then because it's a family, and this works even in general mediation, it's a good idea to try and separate out the intent, what we set out to do, from the impact, what actually happened from the other people's perspectives that has now created the problem. Because if we can establish bona fides rather than malifides, in other words, goodwill rather than bad will, it goes a long way towards getting everybody in a positive headspace where they say, well, we had good intentions, things went wrong, shit happens from time to time, what are we going to do to fix it all up? That's very legitimate. Then we need to explore what really happened, what facts do we have, what do we really think is happening. It's the process that lawyers would call inspection and discovery. It's laying everything out so everybody's working off the same set of facts. We need to know that assumptions have been muscled out by real established facts, or facts that can be established at some stage. And once we've got them there, and even as we're trotting them out, we may try to use empathy in an effective way to get people to rethink their perspective on what did that mean, what was going on, what were the intentions behind that event, that occurrence, and so forth. What we're trying to do is work out, were the parties working off a different set of facts or a different set of beliefs and understandings, or do they have genuine differences in values and beliefs? Because we're going to need to do different things depending on what the outcome of the answer is to those questions. Bear in mind that silence creates stories, and stories retold become received truths. Secrecy creates suspicions, which then go down the same track of filling in the gaps, telling yourself something over and over again until it becomes a reality for you. And bear in mind, in all these situations, we need to treat perceptions of reality as reality. Otherwise, we'll find we're just not dealing with them properly. Consider the use of a neutral facilitator. The reason why you get a facilitator in is that they shouldn't have any bias or preconceptions. It's hard to avoid personal biases, but they shouldn't have anyone in relation to the matters in front of them, and they shouldn't have any real stake in the outcome either. It shouldn't matter to the facilitator who wins, who loses, who feels they came out in front, because ultimately their goal is to make everybody feel like a winner anyway. An observation is that if you bring in a neutral facilitator or an expert, frequently the family will behave itself far better than it would if it was just family around the table. And that's good manners and embarrassment. It's always a good idea, once you've uncovered everything, for people to explain why they did what they did, why they think things have been perceived the way they've been perceived. Open yourself up, be transparent, be open about it, let others be empathic, and if they're not being empathic, it's for the facilitator to make sure that they are being empathic by giving them some encouragement and so on, because we're restoring the humanity and eliminating the monster from the equation. Ultimately, you need to arrive at a solution, and it may not be perfect, it may be only 80% of what you wanted, but if it's good enough, don't let perfect be the enemy of the good enough. Getting perfection is a challenge, particularly in families. Getting good enough gives you something to work with. So we tend to use the phrase sumo: shut up and move on. Get to a point, move on, done. Nail the skeleton back in the closet. And if I were to leave you with one little slogan dealing with silence and secrecy, open communications, it would be this: always strive to say enough. Say it early and say it well, and say it with clear and empathic respect for the other person. If you do this, your problems are unlikely to be big ones so far as relationships with other family members are concerned. If you found this useful, please give us a like, please share with others, let them know that we're around, and I look forward to having you back to the next thrilling instalment. From Jon Kenfield, the Family Business Solutionist, thanks for watching.